when you're taking photos, you cannot show your palms to the camera because there's some technology that will be able to use your fingerprints and use it for illegal activities. In a time where investment scams are being promoted by deep fakes of politicians, how do we discern between the truth and false information? Welcome to WTF, What the Future podcast. I'm Annette.
I'm John.
And this is the show where we tackle difficult topics together with experts. And in this episode, we're going to be exploring misinformation and wondering if you fall for it, whose fault is it? All right, but before we begin, maybe we can introduce our wonderful guests over here today. Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
Nicholas and Elmi. Maybe you can quickly introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm Nicholas. I'm Director for Security and Global Affairs at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, and I run a strategic communications consultancy as well.
How about you, Elmi?
My name is Elmi, so I'm an associate professor at the Department of Communications and New Media. I'm also currently the principal investigator for the Center for Trusted Internet and Community in NUS.
Just warm up, break the ice. So today we're gonna all share what is the most memorable scam or misinformation that we've ever come across. Do you have any in mind? Why don't you start, Elmi?
So, for me, right, personally, the most memorable scam is obviously the scam where I myself kena lah.
Fell for it. Oh no!
Yeah, it's very embarrassing, but every one of us is vulnerable, right? So even though you are so-called an expert or you do a lot of research on it, scams actually prey on human vulnerability at a certain stage. So I was clearing my email, I was looking through my social media, specifically Facebook. And then I found this link to an online shopping site.
Okay.
Wow, and then they say 40% summer sale off. So I was like, oh wow, 40%. And then I went to this external site and I started putting things into the cart. Usually one of the first things that we do to check out whether the information is fake or whether it's a scam site is to Google that site, right? And then we'll come. But for that particular site, there was no information on it. So what happened was, so I submit, and then there was an email that came. The email looked very dodgy. There's no other line. I immediately called the bank. But what I did also, right, was to report it. Basically, what I found out then was that this is quite rampant on social media sites.
Can you imagine next week everything
story.
Oh, okay.
How about you, Nicholas?
During the thick of the pandemic, we were seeing a lot of COVID cures and remedies that were being circulated. I remember the best. One, they said, hang a raw onion in your kitchen window and it'll trap all the virus inside before it enters the house. And the proof of this is that the onion will turn black. And I was like, guys, if you leave any raw vegetable out long enough, it will turn black.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of stuff that is really misinformation, so not really intended to cause any ill will, but people share just in case there's some truth to it. So, I mean, what about you guys?
Yeah, what about you?
I received it very early, the call you and I'm your friend one. Even before the news started talking, I was like one of the pioneer targets. And I remember, right, I just recently reconnected with a secondary school friend. They spoke to me in Chinese. You don't know who I am, eh? So I'm like, that's mana.
Then of course he agrees.
Then he's like, that's because it even sounds like him, eh? Then I was like, it was so crazy and this was so new. And until he asked to borrow money, then I'm like, okay. Like, then aren't we supposed to meet? Then that was the test. Then he's like, but I cannot make it. I just hung on him. Yeah, I just want my secondary school friend to know that if you were there and if it was you, I would have loaned you the money. Even though we haven't met for 10 years.
Okay. Actually, mine, right? My misinformation is a lot closer to Nicholas. My parents sent us this just a few
Oh my god, is it a PMD
weeks
one?
ago. No. You see, it's not even a money scam. It's one of those just nonsense for no reason. Basically, it's this whole video talking about how when you're taking photos, you cannot show your palms to the camera because there's some technology that will be able to use your fingerprints and use it for illegal activities. So when you take photo, you cannot do this. Because
this is okay.
do not show the bottom of your fingers. So it's like they were very serious. My parents were like, you take photo, you cannot like this. You cannot like that. And I just found it so funny because I'm like, can you imagine all these people who believe this? And then from now on, whenever they take photos, they're just like,
but quite harmless, you know what I mean? And they accidentally became cool because now they became You're like, hey, how come suddenly your parents so cool, huh?
They made a whole video, you know, and then it looked very realistic. So I'm just thinking the people behind this, like, why do they want to do that?
Actually, why?
There are obviously a lot of motivations behind it. Some people do it if it's the very garden variety. Some bored content creator wanted to play a trick or make a fool out of people. They'll
Just a
produce
prank
something
lah,
and
for
see
fun
how
lah.
viral it can go. But there's definitely those who have a far more insidious, whether it's a love scam or money scams and things like that. They have a lot more motivation because when people start to get confused, they start to think, oh, I heard something like this before. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. When they start to become very uncertain, they become more and more vulnerable to different parts of misinformation or disinformation.
Let's go back to something that Nicholas mentioned about disinformation and misinformation. Maybe we can define the two right now for everyone who's watching, so they know the difference. Yeah.
So we always talk about fake news, but actually fake news can be broken down into a few different elements. So misinformation is a little bit similar to what we talked about the COVID cures. It's stuff that goes around that's relatively harmless, created and shared without any specific ill intent. And then there's disinformation, which I think a lot of us are a bit more concerned about. That is false information, inaccurate data, or fake news that is created for a specific, usually bad purpose.
Like a malicious intent
malicious
behind it.
intent to affect elections and things like that.
Most of us think we're smart enough to be able to avoid it, right? But why does it still happen? Like, why are we still unable to avoid it?
For one, it's really human behavior, human nature. We are just technically cognitive misers from a psychological perspective. We are all lazy thinkers. You know, especially in an era where there's a lot of information, right? We just basically need to make sense of what we want out of this information. So in this conquest of finding out the information, coupled with the fact that we do not have time, we are looking out for shortcuts, short information, short indicators. So these indicators can lie in, like for example, the number of people who likes it, or the number of people who shares it, the number of comments that it receives. When this comment can be manufactured, so we depend on such kind of indicators.
The example, right, that you very graciously shared with us, that even though you knew that it's possible that it's a scam because you know that you don't know this store, but there's a part of you that it's like but what if it's real deal, you know? And I feel like that mindset alone and the scammers that know that is truly taking advantage of that, so much so, right? They stop designing their ads to make it look realistic.
The scammers are real masters of human nature, real students of human nature. They look at what triggers people. Usually you make bad decisions when you're very excited and very emotionally riled up. So if they wanted to cause division in society, they'll pick on certain pain points. Immigration, foreigners, people stealing your jobs. They'll pick on things like high cost of living, inflation, and people get very worked up, and then they will insert whatever they want to, motivation that they want to get you to do certain things or to think certain ways. The second thing is also similar to what Elmi said. Technology nowadays has made it so easy for us to be completely overwhelmed by information data from multiple sources, whether it's emails, messages from colleagues, bosses, work assignments, stuff that you need to study in school. It comes on all the different devices. And then you go into social media where you're bombarded constantly by sources of information and data. It becomes really, really hard for people to navigate nowadays.
I feel scams are a bit more towards disinformation, right? Well, rather than misinformation, do you think? I'm sure there's a bit of overlap also, lah. Okay,
there is.
But if we were to move more towards misinformation, let's say not like all these malicious scams, why do people want to even spread misinformation on the other side?
The reason why people spread misinformation sometimes, for example, the COVID cures, is usually out of a bit of goodwill. Sometimes they are not very sure. They say, hey, got this really good deal, I want to share with all my family members. You can all go and buy this and you save 40% or whatever. So sometimes it just comes out of, that kind of best intentions, I would say. And sometimes people like to spread things because they want to show that they're the first person to know something.
I mean, one of the things that we see on social media is that a lot of virtue signaling and positionings are happening. So for example, right, where do you stand on certain issues? There are a lot of movements, there are a lot of activism happening on social media. And one of these aspect of, movement is to show solidarity and to show that we are in support of, any movement. In trying to, show solidarity, to build up the movement, to show that, we have all this kind of information supporting our movement and trying to, in other words, motivate and convince one another, right? They get very eager. in sharing information that, that
keeps the cause alive.
that's when polarized communities become extreme. So this is the part where, they try to embed people further into their echo chambers or their bubbles. So they do not do it with any ill intent, but they do it with the fact that they want to show
the signal that I'm part of this tribe.
This highlights a very important part of the conversation, which is that it can transit from misinformation to something that's more malign or with ill intent very easily. Now, if a society is prone to these sort of things, and multiracial, diverse cultures and societies are particularly prone, if you were a bad actor or another country who wanted to destabilize that society, you start to spread more of this content that just drives people to go to the extremes.
Yeah.
But okay, so we've discussed so many of these different categories of misinformation. Based on your, knowledge, right? Which one do you think is actually the most prevalent, category of misinformation?
It is seasonal. So it depends on what is happening.
True.
During COVID, it was a lot of health-related stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, when we come to big events like general elections, then you start to see a spike in content related to politics and political parties and stuff like that. So it's very seasonal.
It's interesting to talk about how misinformation is being actively deployed to divide a country, and how much of that do we see as a lesson, right, that young Singaporeans can learn in terms of, is there a case study you can share of what happened elsewhere?
There are some countries that are very happy to deploy these sort of things. And in recent memory, we started to see big countries, those involved in military conflicts, start to deploy this as even a weapon of war. When they want to prepare a society to be more disunited and weakened, they will start to deploy fake news, disinformation, disrupt your trust in government and stuff like that. So when I actually start a war, a military operation, you all are weakened
You don't want to fight.
Yeah.
So in communication research, we call it the drip effect or the cumulative effect. In a sense that, when we talk about being scammed, we can feel the effect immediately, right?
Yeah.
But these are the kind of effects that, that
Anchoring and priming. Yeah.
priming, so it is embedding in society.
Right.
And, and just building. And seasonal is when it peaks, when, there's this one news that, wow, this is something that can really explode.
Yeah.
So let's work on this and send maybe 5 times the bots. But during peacetime, let's just regularly so these are the kind of things that are happening.
How then can we kind of protect and defend ourselves in that sense if young people wouldn't trust our media and would like to trust their friends, their neighbor, some guy from another country, some guy doing this from a cave, right? And that seems to be a more trustworthy option. What can we actually do to kind of fix this in the longer term?
I think the first question I will ask is that we always look at other countries as examples of what we should be, could be, want to be. So you talk about liberal Western media, for example. There are very, very few examples you can point to say that these guys are 100% neutral, independent, objective.
Yes. Yeah.
If we start by questioning whether the media is not neutral, then we cannot trust. Immediately from not neutral to we can't trust, I think that's where we are conflating two parts of the media. Not neutral doesn't mean you can't trust the media, right? So trust has to be based on real, a real authentic information that is checked, information that is verified. So I think right now we have that climate of a lot of misinformation also, or these are narratives more than information that conflates two irrelevant points together to make our citizens distrust the media, the government, institutions, or even businesses, right? So just because you say that the media is not neutral doesn't mean that you cannot trust the media. It's just that perhaps the media has a certain leaning. That's about it.
Yeah.
But the information...
Understand the bias and consume the facts.
Correct,
Yeah.
exactly.
I think one of the greatest takeaways of what you guys just shared was asking people to truly actually critically think when they see a piece of information. Number one, read beyond the headline. Number two, check who is it that's writing this and try to understand what is the maybe stand or position of the person who wrote this
the
piece
publication.
wrote this piece of information. Maybe you guys can share with me what are some possible consequences if everybody just doesn't think so much when it comes to consuming information. How does it impact Singapore and maybe even the region around us?
There are a lot of consequences to people given wrong information and then acting on that wrong information. But this notion of having information apathetic society, so to the point where, because there's so much mistrust and distrust of all sources of information, some people say I give up trying to decide what is real and what is not. It's too hard. Then you say, how do you decide things? I go with my gut. I will just decide what I feel, instinctively. I think that for sure there is long-term consequences.
Yeah.
If we take it to a slightly scarier level, when you have a society where there's a very low information literacy, where people don't know how to process information or don't trust any information, then that society becomes very open to influence.
What's another thing that youth can do to, for example, prepare themselves for this world of misinformation?
If they come across some information that sounds too good to be true, looks very exciting, looks something that everybody's trying to share, stop first. Ask yourself, 真的吗? Or can I do some research and see where this came from? Is the website credible or not? Is it some weird website?
I think when youth meet one another, right, especially youth from different cultures or different countries, right, you'll find that exciting things happen. One of the things that can excitingly occur is that youth can realize that we share more commonalities than differences.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to misinformation or fake news. So, but when you get the youth together, right, you realize that the kind of information that is relevant to them, the kind of information that is global, that they find very common, they might actually find that we actually share a common problem. For example, you might have this kind of scam in your country, or you might have this fake news, but eventually, you heard about this, this fake news from a specific big country, for example. Then you're like,
it feels to me like you're telling us to travel more lah.
If you're a youth, it's a great time to travel because of NYC's Asia Ready Exposure Program.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it would be a good chance for youth to, experience different cultures firsthand and be part of solving these problems,
Being able to travel, for example, around this region, Asia or Southeast Asia, and understanding the challenges that different people face or the successes that they have in their countries, allow you to look at your own situation and evaluate and understand what is going right, what maybe could be improved, what do we need to be careful of, for example, threats of different types of misinformation or scams, and then net people will emerge stronger as a region as well. So I think any program that allows young people to get in touch with young people in other parts of the world is very valuable.
All right, so thank you so much, Nicholas and Elmi, for joining us today for this very insightful conversation. I had a lot of fun. I think John had a lot of fun.
I had too much fun, I think.
Yeah, okay. And to have even more fun, we're going to do a closing for our audience.
And when we say we mean we,
1, 2, 3. Thank you for tuning into our
podcast.
We learned so much today about
Misinformation. Singer-songwriter Annette Lee, everybody. Insane if you...
So WTF is brought to you by the National Youth Council's Asia Ready Exposure Program in partnership with the Singapore Institute of International Affairs. So if you want to broaden your cultural horizons, you can check out the link below.